In July 1518, the cobblestone streets of Strasbourg looked much like they do today, quiet, tightly packed, and shaded by the cathedral spire. Then a woman named Frau Troffea stepped out of her half-timbered home and started thrashing her feet against the stones. There was no music playing, she just started dancing. Witnesses quickly realized she wasn't celebrating. Her face was completely blank and her eyes were vacant. She was trapped in a deep, waking trance, totally unable to stop her own movements. She kept this up for a full week, only pausing when her body gave out from sheer exhaustion, before waking up and resuming. Her swollen feet bruised and blistered, eventually bleeding right through the leather of her shoes. Her body had essentially been hijacked. An unseen force was pulling the strings, and she was locked inside a failing biological machine. This illustration shows the contagion. Dozens quickly mimicked her, and by August, 400 were consumed by the compulsion to dance. Look closely at the strained body language. The movements were violent. Dancers reportedly cried for help as their limbs thrashed involuntarily. The human cardiovascular system can only sustain extreme aerobic exertion for so long. Hearts and lungs began to break under the strain. Victims collapsed in the streets, dying from cardiac arrest, severe dehydration, and physical exhaustion. The city authorities were paralyzed, watching hundreds physically destroy themselves with absolutely zero understanding of the underlying biological or psychological pathogen. Local physicians evaluated the victims and arrived at a diagnosis built on the era's medical logic. They concluded the dancers were suffering from overheated blood. Their prescribed treatment was counterintuitive: cool the blood by making the victims sweat. The city council cleared out local guild halls and hired professional musicians, hoping to drive the fever out with even more dancing. When the music predictably accelerated the frenzy, the council panicked and banned public dancing. They turned to the church, declaring the plague a divine curse sent by Saint Vitus, a martyr who punished sinners by forcing them to dance. Medical treatment was entirely replaced with ritual. Victims were forced to hold small wooden crosses and wear red shoes that had been painted with crosses and sprinkled with holy water. Every logical intervention of the era acted as an accelerant. By gathering the victims together and applying intense religious weight to their actions, the authorities validated the town's deepest superstitions and poured fuel on the fire. Modern researchers have spent decades trying to solve this case. For a long time, the leading suspect was biological, mass food poisoning, specifically a condition known as ergotism.
Ergot is a fungus that commonly infects damp rye stalks, the main grain used for bread in early modern Europe. This fungus produces a toxic chemical byproduct called ergotamine. This diagram explains why that is dangerous. Ergotamine is a highly psychoactive substance. Its chemical geometry is nearly identical to lysergic acid diethylamide, the exact substance from which modern LSD was originally synthesized. It sounds like a plausible explanation for erratic behavior, but it fails the biology test. A human body heavily poisoned by psychotropic toxins physically cannot sustain days of extreme aerobic activity. They would collapse almost immediately. Furthermore, pharmacology doesn't work like a synchronized swimming routine. You cannot poison 400 independent human bodies and expect them all to experience the exact same hallucination with the exact same coordinated physical reaction. If the trigger wasn't in the bread, it had to be in the brain. The medical consensus today points to mass psychogenic illness. In 1518, the region of Alsace was an environmental pressure cooker. The population was enduring unprecedented starvation, waves of lethal disease, and a pervasive, overwhelming religious dread. Look at how these stress loads accumulate. When a population absorbs this much sustained trauma, the collective nervous system overloads. Their minds fractured into a shared dissociative trance, a stress-induced psychosis built to escape a reality they could no longer endure. There was no external biological infection. The collective trauma was so immense that the human mind became the monster, overriding the body's survival instincts. By early September, the outbreak finally ceased. The surviving choreomaniacs were marched to a mountaintop chapel, praying for absolution from the curse. The ritual worked, but not through divine intervention. It was a massive psychological placebo effect. Because the trance was born from a deep internal belief that they were condemned, only an equally deep belief that they were forgiven possessed the power to break it. The dancing plague was never a physical disease. It was a viral contagion of belief, spread by panic and fueled entirely by desperation. If the human psyche can conjure a deadly, contagious physical frenzy just to cope with the immense stress of its era, we have to ask ourselves, what dormant plagues of the mind are we capable of